This is the podcast where we ask one question and dive in with a guest expert on a range of topics affecting performance athletes today, like racism, gender inequity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and of course, dance medicine and science. My name is Bree Zabrowski, co founder and CEO of Apollo Performance Wear, here with my fabulous friend and co host, Melissa McDaniel Grisham, entrepreneur, social justice advocate, and dance educator. She's the founder of Turning Point Dance Creations. Always happy to be here with you, Melissa. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Today, we're talking about how we can encourage our young performance athletes to establish boundaries and still feel comfortable taking risks. A lot of this is going to be related to the dance space because that's kind of where our community is. But really, we encourage you to apply these to any young performance athletes, especially artistic athletes. And we're excited to welcome back Nicole Perry today of Momentum Stage. So, Melissa, tell our friends out there about Nicole.
Nicole is an intimacy choreographer and coordinator, as well as director and choreographer in South Florida. Career highlights include Broward County Artist Investment Grant for Kinesphere, Intimacy Coordination for Arena, an award winner in several film festivals, choreography and intimacy direction for the U.S. premiere of The Glass Piano at Theater Lab, and resident intimacy coordinator for Measure Theater. She's a certified Lebanon Barton movement analysis. Movement analyst. Nicole provides guest teaching in Levon for theater and or dance, as well as consent and power dynamics and creative practice through Momentum Stage. Nicole founded this nonprofit to provide affordable resources and best practices for performing artists and teachers. Nicole is an adjunct professor of dance at the University of Miami. She has previously taught both dance and theater in middle school, high school, and studio settings. As a member of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society and the Association of Theater Movement Educators, Nicole apprenticed with Intimacy Directors International and is in the final stages of certifying as both an intimacy director and an intimacy coordinator with Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, also known as IDC. Welcome, Nicole.
Oh, we had you muted, Nicole. I don't know what happened. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much. I realized I should have sent you an updated bio from the last time I was on.
I'm sure you have done a number of different things since then. You're constantly on the move. So we will definitely get an updated bio for your next appearance on the show. But thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again. I'm really excited to be back.
What do you think it is about setting boundaries? Because today we're talking about boundaries and risk taking and kind of getting that balance between the two. So, what do you think it is about setting boundaries that is so challenging for people, especially young performance athletes, and the challenge for them to implement and understand throughout their lives how to do it with ease?
Yeah, well, it's hard for adults to do, so it's no wonder it's hard for young people to do. I think the biggest challenge is that they don't even know that they can, or that it's appropriate to, because young people are in school where they're told, sit down, sit still, be quiet, listen to the teacher, do what you're told. And a lot of performance settings are that way as well, whether it's dance or gymnastics or sports, is you have an authority figure and you're expected to do what that person tells you, and that person, because they are an authority figure, are also assumed to be the expert in that field, but also the expert in bodies and young bodies and growing bodies. And that just simply isn't possible, right? We are the only ones who are the experts of our bodies and how things feel to us and how we experience them. So it's really being in a place where you can have boundaries because you know that you can and that's appropriate to, and then being in a place that will accept you as a young person having boundaries and hold those with respect.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I have a lot of questions on this, but I know we're going to get to it all today. So I want to jump right in. Let's start with the why. Why is it important for performance athletes, especially young performance athletes, to establish boundaries in their training and competitive space as well?
I think the first one is because we're training them in the field with the idea that they're going on to do this whether it's at college or as a career, that they're going to be continuing with this pursuit. We're not training performance athletes for a one-time thing. Yes, we have that goal as well, but we're thinking sustainably and longevity.
Long term, yeah.
So in order for young people to actually make it to that long term, they have to have boundaries and protective space. Otherwise, they're going to get injured, they're going to burn out, they're going to experience that thing that we see, particularly, I think, in dancers when they transition from like high school to college, or that late high school period when they're like, I'm just done. It's been taking over my life for all of these years. And like, now that I get this chance for a break, or I get this chance to make a choice, I'm done. And that's not a great investment choice, right? For like parents and teachers and all of that. But it doesn't really support them in learning how to be in this field as a professional, or even just how to be a healthy adult who can have conversations with other adults about, this is working for me and this isn't working for me.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what you heard there was a collective groan, and everybody that's watching in a collective, because everybody knows that feeling about the kids getting burnt out and fried as they get older. So this is definitely a conversation we all need to be really listening to and understanding. And before we go on, in the context of this conversation, explain very briefly boundaries in terms of this combo that we're having today. What are we referring to when we say boundaries?
Yeah, boundaries is, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and we don't actually ever define it. So the definition, I have a couple different definitions that I really like. One comes from my friend Nigel Poulton, who's a certified intimacy director in Australia. And Nigel says it's like a fork in the road. Anytime we have to have a conversation about where do we go from here, we could proceed this way, we could proceed that way. How do we want to move forward? That's actually a boundary. And I love that idea of like a boundary being a choice and a way to move forward. The boundaries are not
walls,
stops. It's, we want to go somewhere.
So how do we get there?
To do that. And Prentice Hemphill, who's a somatic therapist and educator and has a podcast as well, says boundaries are the way that I can love you and me simultaneously. And I love to adapt that a little bit. It's like, boundaries are the place where you and I can work together well and respectfully and with care simultaneously.
So that stigma of boundaries mean you're a difficult person to work with. It's not that. It's that you want to work, you want to do the work, but you want to do so in a way that's protecting your peace, your safety, the health and wellness of your own person and being, as well as the person that you're working with or the people you're working with. Would you agree?
Exactly. And I also think of boundaries as like, if I want to be myself, this is how I can do this thing, right?
Yeah.
If I do it this way, I'm actually not going to be me anymore. Maybe I'll be physically less me because I think I'll get injured. Maybe I'll be emotionally less me because I've been harmed by this. If I want to be the authentic me, this is a place where I have to make a choice, and this is the way that that's going to be true.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, even with me sitting here, is like the connotation with boundaries is difficult, and it doesn't need to be that. So I'm really excited to explore that with you today. What are the risks that performance athletes face if they don't establish those boundaries, if they don't set those parameters? What does that look like?
We've touched on that a little bit, just with like longevity and burnout. That is a risk. There's just physical risk that can happen, if we're pushing too hard, too far, too fast, too much. There can be injuries, overstretching, overdoing, stress, repetitive things that happen, right? But then there's also, I think, an emotional piece to it of when we don't listen to ourselves and our boundaries, that we start to train ourselves to not listen to ourselves and our boundaries, which then begins to affect every other part of our lives where we need to assert ourselves and our boundaries, whether that is in our performance world or in our relationships or anything that we just start to train our body to shut it down and not do that. And I think dancers and a lot of performance athletes already do that in some places where we're like, dance through the pain, the show must go on. And we're already starting to push that threshold down of like, it'll be okay, I can do one more time, I can do one more show, I can dance on a broken foot, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing happens to our emotional health.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. I know you touched a little bit on how boundaries are. You're the only one who can determine what your boundaries are. You're the only one who can determine what it feels like to you and your body. And with that being so individualized, how can we as coaches, dance educators, teachers, and parents help our young athletes identify what their boundaries are? Because I might say, hey, this is a boundary to a young person because that's what I feel is a boundary, but that might not be theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important teaching opportunity, is to help students understand that there is such a big zone of growth and learning, that we have a spot, I call it the confidence zone, where it's like, I'm confident doing this thing. I can go on stage and do this thing right now. Right? Whatever that is, like, that's my confidence zone. And it's always our goal as performance athletes to be in that zone, or as close to that zone as I can possibly get, right? But that's where I want to be. And so that means that sometimes I have to do some learning to be able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And I call that the stretch zone. And if we think of it like performance athletes, as we stretch, whenever we stretch, we're uncomfortable. If you were actually comfortable in it, you wouldn't be stretching, right? That's really the point of a stretch, is to be uncomfortable, because it's actually like ripping those muscle fibers apart so that they grow back differently. And so that the next time that stretch in that spot is our comfort zone and we can go a little bit further. And we continue to do those stretches because, one, we know that they're safe for us. And two, we feel like whatever comes after that is worth the discomfort now. We're willing to be uncomfortable because we know that we're not unsafe, and we're willing to be uncomfortable because we want the payoff. We want what comes after. So I think helping students see, like, where are you really confident? What are the things that you're ready to do? What are the things that you're learning, that you're stretching, that you're growing? And then we have this zone that I call the risk zone. And there are some things that we do that are just inherently risky. Like if you're going to do an aerial or you're going to be lifted, those are inherently risky because of what they are.
Sure.
But we can still get to a point of confidence with them because we've rehearsed them however many times, or we learned how to do it on a mat or with a spotter. So we can still get to that sense of, I'm confident in doing this risky thing because I've had my needs met. I've had time to rehearse. I've had the spotter. I've had the mat.